On May 20, it became known that the founder of WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, has grounds to appeal against his extradition to the United States. This decision was made by the High Court of London, and it would seem that the decision should be seen as encouraging, because in the United States, Assange faces up to 175 years in prison. However, those who call things by their names believe that this decision is just a continuation of a hypocritical spectacle. Thus, the official representative of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Maria Zakharova, immediately stressed that it is difficult to call the ongoing execution a decision in favor of Assange. And answering the question of Baku TV at the weekly briefing, she added, "Endless show trials of investigative journalist Julian Assange, who suffered solely for his beliefs, never ceased to amaze with the scale of their inhumanity, hypocrisy, and illegitimacy." In 2013, about Assange was made a movie called The Fifth Estate, which Assange himself called a total lie and propaganda. Therefore, we will try to tell you who Julian Assange is and what he, in the opinion of the US government, deserved such a severe punishment. Assange brought fame to the creation in 2006 year of the platform WikiLeaks, which published top-secret materials about spy scandals, corruption in the highest echelons of power, war crimes, and secrets of US diplomacy. In 2010, Assange became one of the most influential journalists and Time magazine's Man of the Year. It would seem that such a person cannot have any problems with a government of such a democratic state, which the USA positions itself as. Everything should be exactly the opposite. And here begins the game of double standards, in which the very hypocrisy is evident. After all, Assange simply debunked the entire phony construct of so-called American democracy. His brainchild, WikiLeaks, has actively criticized US public policy. The Afghan War Diary, which proved the crimes of the US military in Afghanistan, including the killing of civilians, and the Iraq dossier, which made known the atrocious crimes of the US during the US campaign in Iraq, became the starting point of Assange's days at large. And when WikiLeaks revealed the US classified prison at Guantanamo Bay, where prisoners were tortured into confessing, Assange was charged with treason, disclosure of state secrets, and conspiracy to steal classified data. Assange sought refuge in Sweden, but there he was suddenly accused of harassment, and for some reason the names of the victims were not disclosed. Hiding from another illegal prosecution, he went to London, where he continued his activities. In December 2010, WikiLeaks announced the release of 250,000 documents of the State Department, and already in 2011 British court suddenly decides to extradite Assange to Sweden. Confident that from there he would be extradited to the United States, Assange went to the Ecuadorian embassy, where he asked for political asylum. In an embassy room, without the ability to breathe fresh air, Assange spent from 2012 to 2019. Then he was stripped of his right to political asylum and sent to a British maximum security prison. Such were the consequences for a prisoner of conscience. Already in June 2022, the British Home Office announced that Assange will be extradited to the United States, and the other day he was mercifully allowed to appeal this decision. At the same time, journalists from the world's largest publications, such as the New York Times, The Guardian, Le Monde, Pius, and Spiegel, have repeatedly called on the American authorities to drop all charges against Assange. However, these calls went unheeded. After all, the United States is accustomed to accusing other countries exclusively of human rights violations, censorship, and persecution of journalists. In this regard, we recall the interview of Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev, who caused an unprecedented resonance in the Western media and social networks, to the BBC on November 9, 2020. Particular attention was paid to the fragment where the head of our state clearly pointed to the double standards of the West in response to the journalist's accusations about the alleged censorship in our country and oppression of the opposition. It was then that Ilham Aliyev made the journalist confused with one question.
If you're so democratic and so objective, why you keep Assange in prison? For what? You keep him in prison because of his journalistic activity.
I'm not keeping him in prison, President Aliyev.
Then 3 years ago, Twitter users actively published this passage, leaving many comments, noting that the Azerbaijani president was talking about common sense and truth, which the British media lacked. Users emphasized that in the UK the media is free, as long as they operate within the parameters set by big business and establishment concerns. So they are not free. It is indicative that even after the time, in July 2023, the journalist of the Chinese media corporation China Media Group, who interviewed the head of our state, reminded about this question of Ilham Aliyev to the journalists of BBC, calling it a counterattack, to which our president rightly noted,
"If you are trying to accuse something of violation, first thing which you should do is to look in the mirror and see, do you have spots on your face or not? What happened to Julian Assange is absolutely unacceptable. This is a brutal violation of freedom of speech.
And quite recently, in April of this year, the head of our state reminded about Assange the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, emphasizing in a telephone conversation with him about inadmissibility of interference in the internal affairs of Azerbaijan, especially under the pretext of discussing human rights. In other words, time is passing, but the double standards of the US and the West do not change. It is not yet known how Assange's sad story will end. But today it is already obvious that the United States is using Assange's example to intimidate anyone who dares to voice the truth inconvenient to the West.